All right, I'd like to start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Makakodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is A Nation and Its Belief in Art. I was watching a video that Elder Apostle Tahar did on the beheading for the witness of Yahweh Shai. I believe it was something along those lines. And prior to him, getting into that lesson, he was speaking about the Byzantine Empire. He was speaking about the Roman Empire, and given the different dates of approximately when, these empires fell, and when the 1,000 years was up, it was still a little bit of time left, because we didn't fall right away. It took a period of time, and that's how it happens with empires. It takes time to fall. There's have been examples like the Babylonian Empire that fell overnight, but for most parts it takes time to destroy an empire. And it got me to thinking about, the Romans. Then it also got me to thinking about, after that, about the Greeks. And when you examine the Romans and the Greeks, and you examine their art, whether it was statues or paintings or whatever the case was always dedicated to what they called the pantheon. The pantheon, pan means all and theon means gods. So their pantheon of all gods was a dedication of their devotion to these different deities like Zeus, Apollo, Aphrodite, and all them. They had the Greek variations, and you had the Roman, Latin variations of the names, and that was so amongst the Greeks when they had their different, gods that they worshipped, and it was also the same among the Romans. They had pantheons, where you could go and they had different statues of Apollo and Zeus and, the different gods and goddesses that they worshiped. Now, when the Roman Empire fell and the Holy Roman Empire started taking over, when it started to go into Byzantium, you notice that the art changed from all those different gods to things dedicated more to the Most High, to Yahweh Shai, to the prophets, to the disciples, to holy, to the saints, with your Israelites. And when you research that art, that's another way you can know that those people that were ruling at that particular time were not heathens because of their art form. And then when the Renaissance period started to come into play, then what they started doing was they were starting to take the history of Byzantium, or the art of Byzantium, which they call the Holy Roman Empire, and they started to whitewash those images. And that's the only reason why today with Esau you have what they have, as so-called God and so-called Jesus Christ, and the angels and the prophets and all that as being so-called white people, because they took the images of the people of the Lord after the Byzantine Empire, when they went into the Renaissance Empire, and painted over them as being so-called white people. And that's what the devil does. And this is why when we read in Revelation, the 20th chapter, which is a chapter that jumps back and forth in history, we get the insight as to what these devils started doing when they started taking over the world at the time, during what was called the Renaissance, which is a French word, means rebirth, because it was their time to come back into power. So what they did was, instead of going back to their pantheon and their different gods, they just took the gods of Israel, or the God of Israel, and his son, and the angels, and the prophets and the disciples and all that, what they called Mary and all that, and started to paint them as so-called white people. And that's where the deception came in, because the history in Revelation 20, goes back and forth in time, but it also gives us an indication of what happened to this devil and how he was shut up and shut down for a period of about 1,000 years. And then when they started coming back into power through the Renaissance, that's when they started changing the art from the darker images to the white images, so-called white images. There's a term called iconoclasm, and that's how they did it. And that's what the Lord said, that the earth is given into the hand of the wicked, and he covered the faces of the judges thereof. So it's nothing new. But when you go back to the origins of the Greek Empire, with when Esau was ruling during Alexander the Great, and the Roman Empire of Julius Caesar, so on and so forth, they had what was known as a pantheon, which was a bunch of different gods and goddesses that they worshipped, for their beliefs and for their so-called religion. So I was meditating on that, and I said, you know what, I kind of briefly mentioned, in the video, about that, that their belief was in their art, and that's why the Greeks and the Romans both had the pantheon and all those different gods like Zeus and Aphrodite and Artemis and, your Apollos and, your different, Hades and all that, which all goes back to Jake, that Esau took over. But they made a pantheon, which was a worship to all the gods. But during the time of the ending of the Byzantine Empire, with the beginning of the Renaissance period, that's when they started painting their pictures, as being, they actually painted new pictures as being so-called white, and they were defacing some of the statues and the paintings they were painting over them, the dark color they were painting over it as so-called white people. This is where you get a term called iconoclasm, which is the defacing of an image, and that's how the Great Deception started to push throughout the planet. And this is why when we read in Revelation, the 13th chapter, where it speaks about, that they had the names of blasphemy on them, we understand now that blasphemy is their injurious speakings against who the Most High is, who his Son is, who the angels are, because they did it against the heavens, And this is why we see today, so the so-called white men being, which are the Edomites, being honored and reverenced and worshipped as being the Most High, as being so-called Jesus Christ, which is Yahushua in the Hebrew, and this is why we see what we see going on today. But prior to them deceiving the world, their whole worship and belief system of religion was all based upon a whole bunch of different gods and deities and goddesses, going back to the pantheon. So, like I said, when the apostle was speaking about the Byzantine Empire and the Roman Empire and the Renaissance, it kind of put that thought in my mind. I said, I'll just say a few words on that. I found it kind of interesting how they pretty much went from worshiping all those different gods to worshiping what Jake had portrayed in art during the Byzantine Empire, and this is why today you have Esau, worshiping, God and so-called Jesus Christ and all that, because it's a reflection of our culture. It's a reflection of our belief system that Jake, they put it into a art form, and that's what Jake does. That graffiti and all that, that's nothing more than the modern day art form of Jake and how they got down, because that's what Jake did. They painted art, because you had all different types of talents in Israel, and one of the talents was to draw, and that's where you see brothers drawing different, pictures and of the Lord and all of that, because that's in our spirit, that's in our makeup, and that's what they did. And Esau came in and took over and put his face on it, and this is why now the cover is being pulled off, and they're not liking the exposure. Their skirt is being lifted up, and they're not liking the exposure. Because we're starting to really find out who this man really is. He's nothing more than the devil that the Bible speaks of. He's the great plagiarizer. He's the great deceiver. The great slanderer, the great blasphemer. The devil that the Bible speaks of, the physical counterpart of the spiritual demon Satan on the earth, set up as such to deceive the world. And now we're coming to the point where they're being revealed for that, and they're being set up for judgment of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. So I just wanted to say a couple of words on that. Salaki, I couldn't really pull on the precepts. I'm driving, and I'm not from the tribe of Reuben. The Reubenites, they be driving and pulling precepts while they're driving. Just a little joke. But with that, I pray that you brothers have been edified. Until next time, I say shalom.